So hello, tonight, Monday night, I've decided to continue. Actually, I wasn't planning on this, but I decided to read 4 additional chapters from the Without and or Beginning essay of last year. And what I'm doing actually is skipping just one section, which details actually in a kind of, it kind of skips over a lot of things, but it talks about what happened between quitting the label and moving to Tokyo. And that actually encompasses like 2 years, 2018, 2019. So I don't discuss 2018, 2019 in much detail at all in this essay. I could actually write another essay about it. And in fact, I had started last year writing an essay about the beginnings of This Dark Shroud, which it was at the end of 2017 as a solo project. And then 2018, I did my first solo This Dark Shroud live performance, which was my first also sort of multi-instrumental performance, playing both guitar and keyboard and drums, and with backing tracks. And then in 2019, This Dark Shroud became a duo with Joe Shotaro on bass, my friend. So I talked a lot in the last, section about all of these mismatches with collaborations. And then Laughing Moon was the guy I'd performed with in Another Room, and which had worked out, the blues guitar player, Tana, or Tomoki. And then Joe joins us for Laughing Moon. And then after Tomoki leaves in 2018, Joe and I begin to collaborate, and we do a collaboration as This Dark Shroud in 2019. And so I'm going to fill in the blank here, because what I'm going to do is, like I say, skip over that chapter and start with the following chapter, which is the beginning of 2020 in Tokyo. What happened at the end of 2019? Well, there were several things that happened. I won't go into all the details, but just very briefly. My contract at Kyushu University, where I'd worked full-time, came to an end, and I had to decide what to do because I didn't have full-time work anymore. So I decided to move to Tokyo. The other major thing that had happened in between that I haven't talked about in as part of the last section was I mentioned at the end of the 2016 section that I had separated from my wife and then eventually got a divorce, although I was still seeing my daughter weekly. And I ended up, I got into another relationship with another woman who was my girlfriend at the time I came to Tokyo at the end of 2019 after I lost my contract at Kyushu University. We came to Tokyo together. So this kind of picks up from that point. And I didn't have much work when I came to Tokyo. At the end of 19, we were living together. We had some problems, but we were together in 2019. And then in 2020, this kind of picks up from that point. And so I think with that much background, that's enough to jump now to chapter 9. And I will read again I plan to read 4 chapters. So chapter 9 is COVID-19, Personal Hell Begins. So starting with COVID in 2020 and what will be the breakup, not to be, spoiler, but, and then Finding the Light, 2021. The Way Out is In. This is, so 10, Finding the Light is chapter 10. Chapter 11, The Way Out is In. And chapter 12, which I call Ukraine, Infinity, and a Dark Planet, and in parentheses, or What is the Truth of You and I. So I'd like to begin with chapter 9, and I'm skipping over chapter 8, the title of which is Fast Forward from late 2017 to late 2019. And I say fast forward because I'm just covering a large swathe of, time and events in one single, rather a relatively short section. So I'm going to start then with chapter 9, COVID-19 / Personal Hell Begins. chapter 9 begins with a lyric. Well, you sit here in this room waiting for nothing. This waiting for nothing comes from the song Room, which I wrote in 2020. I'm now going to go and talk about this. So 2020, the COVID years, part 1. Part 2 is 2021. After finding 2 part-time teaching jobs, I endured the loss of work and income due to COVID-19. One of my jobs becomes impossible to continue, albeit temporarily, with no online teaching option at the time. As in March of 2020, the virus becomes an issue, the government recommending and then more or less requiring that its citizens not travel for long distances by train, to work from home, to stay at home, and to do what is called in Japanese jishuku, or self-control, or another way to translate it would be like self-discipline in a sense. You're staying inside and not going out. Do it not only for yourself, but do it for those around you who are maybe not as young or as robust as you are. The virus, they say, is a killer. Perhaps even worse yet for me, and on a more personal level, within months of COVID, what I feared would happen more than anything else finally arrives. Or maybe it is what I had anticipated would happen and or had created and or worsened and or expedited, I put in parentheses, to some extent by my overreacting, not shutting my mouth when I should maybe have just kept it shut, agreed, even when I did not or could not agree, or at least had I not resisted things, not openly disagreed, and or if I had been able to endure the most unpleasant of moments together, swallow down my pride, put the expectations I had had aside, and the doubts and the suspicions, and maybe had I also stayed completely sober, stayed calm, even if and when the other party was unable to stay sober or calm, and also etc., 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 etc. But then one night, indeed, the shit did finally hit the fan, and it hit it hard. Boom, snap, break, broken. Like the fragile branch of the tree on which accumulated snow suddenly becomes too heavy for it to endure the weight any longer. The straw that broke the camel's back. And of course, the stressful, bitter breakup, the insults, the accusations too, following, of course, the anger, the regret or the regrets, the confusion, the painful repetitions, and then later and once again the self-flagellation, the self-questioning, self-hatred, loneliness, and also fear. Did she lie? Was I played like a fiddle? Were those comments he wrote on SNS just bravado, or were they proof itself of what I had suspected? Running from the things that you don't understand, running from the things that make you hurt. Line from Running, from 2019, the previous year. Well, I moved out, ran away. I'll try not to do too many quotes. I noticed I was the last talking to too many of these finger quotes. Always running. I ran for myself, only to find myself staring me straight in the face once again, as before I had run. Now, we are in our first ever state of emergency in Tokyo. It's early summer 2020. Wearing my mask, worried about everything, and half crazed, in a taxi with some clothes and my little travel suitcase on wheels, and my desktop computer at the time in a box, off to a monthly rental room, all electric and gas included in the monthly fee, a bed, a cheap desk, a single electric burner for cooking, not my home. Only a half year has passed since arriving in Tokyo, full of hopes of finally starting a new chapter of my life, the hope of finding a new stable university job, or else some other preferably creative job, if possible a long-term contract. And I write this still at the time of writing has not happened, and in fact it's a year later and it still hasn't happened. If not an opportunity for permanent employment, in other words, a tenure track position, and this too still has not happened to date, and ditto, it still has not happened. Coming to Tokyo together with my partner, thinking somehow it will just work out, that we can make it work out, that things will somehow just, somehow. Wear your mask, stay at home, keep social distance. Will I ever find love again? Will I ever perform live again? Will I ever make new friends again? Meet new people again? Can I afford to pay my bills with such little work and so few opportunities during a pandemic? My mental state now devolves rather drastically and quickly too. Very, very fast. Frighteningly fast. In the midst of my breakup and moving myself into temporary housing where I'd stayed, sleeping most days and eating very little for over 2 months, I had managed to compose and record a rather dark LP, one of the darkest of my musical career to date. I entitled it simply Untitled. Sunny, my friend and collaborator, guitarist Sunny Yasuda, I actually recently posted new work we did together this year. So Sunny ultimately contributes guitar to one of the tracks that he has taken an immediate liking to, what becomes the opener of the LP, a track entitled Room, sending me his parts via file sharing to mix into the already finished track, on which I played piano via MIDI and sang, accompanied by slow, menacing electronic beats and some synth noises. And here in the text version, I have a link to the video for Room and a photo of the cover of Untitled. The LP Untitled is itself filled with long, dark pieces. And the pieces that make up the bulk of the album, apart from Room and the closer, There Is a Light, a more hopeful tone prevailing within its quiet string arrangement, are rather abstract, the other tracks. The vocals and vocalizations are themselves fairly abstract as well. All lyrics on this album were improvised on the spot, and I think most of the pieces on the LP do not come across so much as bona fide songs as they do soundtracks to someone's nightmare. Perhaps everyone's collective nightmare at the time. In other words, this is the soundtrack or a soundtrack to living in a time of uncertainty and of fear during the first wave of COVID-19, the mysterious Wuhan virus that has infected the entire world. 2 masks and a wish. When will they let us out to play? It's from 2 Masks, from the Untitled album. Got these, I use these quotes, these lyrics throughout the essay. Moving into my new apartment finally at the beginning of July 2020, and in fact it was July 1st, 2020, and July 1st this year marked year number 5. And this is the place. I'm still here. The apartment, as I say here, where I now still reside at the time of this writing, and still now, and having officially broken up with my ex, having also gotten all of my stuff out of her, now it was hers rather than our place. This was after myself having moved into temporary housing twice, in fact, before finally finding this place to settle into. I call it an exceedingly small but also rather clean room with 3 gas burners for cooking, a nice bathtub, and double glass sliding doors leading to the balcony, which provides extra insulation and also soundproofing. Anyway. I recorded more COVID-themed work whilst struggling with the lingering after effects of the breakup, with depression, with loneliness, during the excessively hot, sweltering summer of 2020, like this summer, again, blasting the air conditioner nearly 24/7 that summer. I couldn't sleep without it. I would wake up every night sweating profusely and was forced time and again to put it back on in order to sleep at all. These days I sleep with it off, but I wake up sweating, so it's really the same. This was a time when every week it seemed there were more deaths reported in the news, more warnings, more shutdowns, if not full lockdowns. Lockdowns are not legal in Japan, but the government suggested staying at home as much as possible again and again, and they continued to call for further restrictions, forcing businesses to close early and so forth. I could not perform live. I could not meet people, nor could I make new friends, really, in Tokyo. I had at the time only been living in Tokyo for less than a year, and I was craving some sort of social interaction and stimulation, but it was then impossible. I also could not find much work apart from the few part-time classes I had and was conducting online via Zoom at one university. It wasn't enough income. I drank too much, buying beer at the convenience store or the supermarket in my neighborhood, sometimes wine or harder liquor as well, and drinking it alone whilst rather depressed in my apartment room. I vented my frustration and my anxiety and fears about contracting, maybe even dying of COVID via SNS. I repeatedly pissed off some people I had before considered good friends, realizing also that some others, perhaps that I thought were close friends, were not actually friends after all. And I realized too that I myself had acted rather toxic in many instances, pushing people away. And gradually as the year progressed, I began working on myself, more and more chipping away at my assumptions about things little by little, trying as much as and whenever possible to take a step or two back from myself, as it were. I began listening to many talks by people much wiser than myself, online, on YouTube, etc., to Indian gurus, especially to Sadhguru and to Krishnamurti, and to Buddhist monks such as the Dalai Lama or some other Japanese Zen teachers. I started recalling some of the things I'd learned from my studies in Buddhism and Taoism as a graduate student, but not only as I had approached this academically, but also from a more meditative or a contemplative practitioner side of things, as well as the concepts in Sanskrit of shunyata, or emptiness, and also what's called in the Japanese language, as frequently encountered in Zen studies or practice, etc., mujo, which is impermanence. So shunyata is like emptiness or void or something, and mujo is impermanence. And applying what I could to my, at the time, rather perverted, in the sense of twisted or somewhat distorted, thought patterns, way of thinking, in order to better recognize the mind traps I've been setting for myself for so long now. I embraced Stoic philosophy. I tried online therapy for a bit, which wasn't so super great, but I tried it out. Took long walks daily, mostly at night, since the daytime was too hot, and sometimes for 2 or even 3 or more hours, with music of some sort always in my ears. Eventually stopped taking all medications I'd previously taken for depression. The medications, this is an aside, had some rather nasty side effects, including having gained some weight around the waist for the first time in my life, and like really from 2018 to 2020, that was the time I had actually gained some weight. And also my face was a little bit rounder than it is now. I have a very slender face, but at the time, overall, I was bigger. I also experienced a bit of like thinning hair, I noticed, and other side effects, which would last long after I'd stopped taking the medications and caused me a great deal of physical as well as mental, basically suffering. I say, though I won't go into any other details here. And so slowly as 2021 approaches, I begin gradually, bit by bit, to start finding the light which I had sung about on the final track of the Untitled LP from 2020, before I found this place. There is a light on the other side, what lies beyond all your worries and all your fears. I won't sing it now. And that's from the song There Is a Light, which is the final track on Untitled. The light was there, must be there somewhere, if only I could find it, if I could persist in my search for the light and unwaveringly seek it out. I would find it. I had to. My life literally depended on it. Starting in the summer of the same year, 2020, I also took part in a collaboration, which is online collaborations, creating an EP together and performing at 2 year-end live shows together with a guy I was supposed to have collaborated with live before the pandemic had hit. And I had still been living with my ex at that time. At which time, our planned performance together, our collaboration had been, much to my disappointment, canceled. The state of emergency was declared for Tokyo with all the live houses temporarily shutting down. I was, as I explained above, in a very bad mental state at this time or by this time, and it was no doubt quite obvious to anyone who had been reading my SNS feeds on Facebook, etc., that I was now alone, living in this small, sweltering apartment all the time and not doing very well either. Not so good at all. And so one day, this acquaintance I'd only met once or twice actually at events before the start of the pandemic contacted me via Facebook Messenger and asked me if I'd like to collaborate with him remotely, to which I readily agreed. He sent me some audio files of himself improvising what I considered to be rather acid jazz-esque. They reminded me a bit of John Zorn recordings I had once before heard. The instrument he played was not a regular saxophone, but rather what he referred to as a reed sax, consisting as it did of the body of a Western-style flute with a saxophone mouthpiece on it, an idea he himself had apparently come up with. The name we took for a project was Lower Than God. This was his idea, combining the name Lowe from my last name Lowe and Goda from his stage name, so Lower Than God. Lowe Goda. I took the chaotic improvised samples that he'd sent me and I shaped them into instrumental, except for the very first track with a tiny bit of vocal at the very beginning, and that's it, just vocalization. I turned them into instrumental electronica tracks, adding a lot of fast beats, mixing and layering and effectorizing the samples I was given to work with of his reed sax and some other instruments. I also added my own piano parts, some samples. For example, one piece features the voice of the then President Donald Trump, the more things change, speaking about how all Americans had the so-called right to choose not to wear masks in public during the pandemic, as the quote goes, Americans must be allowed their freedoms. I also incorporated noise elements and so on. The final track of the EP was a quiet, almost ambient track with sampled nature sounds in the background. He now playing on this track a standard breathy flute along with my improvised piano flourishes bathed in reverb and some subtle jazzy beat loops I added. This final track on the album remains my favorite on the EP. And the EP, so the project name is Lower Than God, and the name of the EP was We Advance Masked. And I'm not sure if I wrote this here, but it was published or his label. He has a label, and this was the first in the series that they published on his small label as a CDR, and he designed that. Although I designed the cover and mixed and mastered and produced it. Although we had gone into the studio a few times and also had twice performed live together in late 2020, along with some rather heavy COVID restrictions, everyone wearing masks, frequently disinfecting their hands and having their temperatures taken at the door before entering, etc. After 2020 ended, we never collaborated on this project again together. However, I used some of the recordings he'd sent me, the flute, and he sent me accordion and some other things, to use for the initial EP, I say. There were still quite a few from which to choose from left over in the folder to arrange new abstract instrumental and or spoken word pieces ending up on some of my own solo releases the following year, and I'm going to talk about this. So I did use some of them on my 2021 albums and kind of created B-sides for other things and so forth with his instrumentation. Okay, so I had a little storage issue and now it's all apparently taken care of. So I'm going to continue with 10, Finding the Light, 2021. It starts with a quote from the song Hope, This Hopefulness for Me and You. It was 2021. So this then is 2021, the COVID years part 2. By the end of 2021, I will complete what becomes my Tetralogy, a series of 4 LPs about my experiences, not only of being alive during the era of the pandemic, of bar and restaurant and live house shutdowns, of social distancing, which for me literally meant staying away from people, almost entirely most of the time, a part that is from when I was able to start again teaching face-to-face, seeing my students. I had been using Zoom at home. This after having a 2 times vaccination of Pfizer in fall of 2021. And then also I was able to finally visit my daughter again for the first time since I had seen her in 2020 when I had gone to Fukuoka to do a live performance with my friends, Joe Shotaro, the bassist, Sunny Yasuda, and Tana. And also I saw my daughter, who was still at that time living in Fukuoka with her mother. This time I visited her where she's living now, which is not Fukuoka anymore. And other, continuing on here, so obsessive, the era of obsessive hand washing and masking, the Tokyo Olympics fiasco during the deadly Delta variant outbreak in the summer of 2021. And I say as an aside, I barely left my apartment all summer long, except to do food shopping for myself or to take long walks after sundown, or to go into the studio a single train stop away from my apartment, my head and belly often filled with beer, to play my guitar or to practice the keys and or to film live in studio videos I would later edit alone in my apartment room, tweaking the sound in Logic. And this kept me alive musically, not to mention more or less sane, and continuing also my ongoing personal struggle to recover from a breakup that was by now, in other words by then, only anymore alive in my own head and imagination and memory. Yet it still possessed me. I was struggling to understand what love was, what attachment was, what loneliness was, and why I still had so many negative and self-defeating thoughts going around and around inside my skull, especially around the breakup, but also just in general. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been having such negative thoughts all of my life. I needed to do something about it. It was quite literally, to me, in some sense, a matter of life and death. And I write in parentheses, I'm getting a bit closer day by day, month by month, but I was certainly not quite there yet. Not quite. Moving on, in any case, Tetralogy, as I came to call it with a capital T, was not initially planned as a so-called tetralogy, tetra meaning 4, so a series of 4. Nor even was it planned as a series with any sequel or sequels. The Hope album was just the Hope album at first. So at the time I completed Hope and published Hope in early 2021, it was just the first album of 2021. The LP Hope ended up including some collaborations, all done remotely via computer, via the internet, including one track with Sunny Yasuda on guitar. I had solicited from him at the end of 2020. I said, could you send me guitar? I'd like to do a track with you together. And that track became Is Happiness a Verb? And the vocal was totally improvised on that. And another collaboration featuring my friend and former collaborator, which was Takeshi Goda, and it had the reed flute on it, which I used for the third and final part of a 3-part song cycle I had entitled Mental Ward, and the version on the Hope LP was subtitled Breathe. So that was an alternate mix, alternate version. The title track of the album, Hope, right, which I had played kind of a lot in 2021, 2022, when performing live in different versions. So I write that it became an important song, such as, songs like Chaos or Want, Black Nail. The Hope original version, or original recording, appears in 2 versions, actually 2 mixes. One is the opener, and that has the vocals with dark ambient atmospherics backing it, and the second version was completely a cappella at the end of the LP. So it's bookends, first, last track. Later in that same year, 2021, I would do other arrangements of Hope, a remix with tabla beats, subtitled Pray for India. That was during the Delta outbreak when it was on the news that India was just having a surge and many people dying. So I called it Pray for India. And also versions on which I improvised on guitar, on acoustic, while singing the vocal line in a freer, more improvisatory style, even than on the original. Another significant piece included on the Hope LP was a long, dark ambient instrumental entitled Exodus, for which I also edited together a video, which included animation from, I say, a former collaborator, that's Takeo Udagawa, and I say former because we had collaborated up until the previous year, 2019, 2020. He had sent me a lot of animation to use. I used it on the COVID video from the 2020 album, Untitled, and I used his animation for like a video I did for Flags of Rage, which was an older song, and interspersing with footage of Trump and things like this. So this was the last time that we collaborated on a video, I think. It was the last time I collaborated with Sunny Yasuda until this year. He sent me tracks again this year, and we did a new album, which I put up last night in its definitive version, actually. And it was the last time, basically, with Takeshi Goda, though. He sent me, I think one other time after this, later on in 2021, he sent me some accordion and flute, and I ended up using it on a new version at that time of Chaos. All right, so these collaborations and the video animation with Takeo Udagawa's animation, which, like I did with other videos, usually when I used his animation, I would combine it with other footage. In this case, film clips taken from open source video online, and I say that it added, I thought, some context and a more story-like feel to the Exodus video, even if I just used the animation alone. In any case, as time went on, and as I began to play the acoustic more and more, I started getting back into playing the acoustic. There was no acoustic on Untitled, there was no acoustic on Hope. Now I start playing it more in the studio, and then at home. I also decided to re-record some of my earlier songs, remixing electronic pieces as well from the past. In some cases, they ended up sounding completely different. And I found that I was able to use the guitar as an improvisational instrument, and even as a percussive one, tapping at rhythms on the body, so forth. I also started doing my first talk series at home in the summer of 2021, in which I discussed alone in my room, this room in front of my iPhone camera, as now, on its stand. First, the LPs in this new series. The first ever talk I did was about the Tetralogy. It was about the first two LPs, Hope and then The Sun Is Coming, the follow-up. And I spoke about my thoughts on the pandemic and on the vaccines and on the Olympics. And then over time, I broadened out to other topics, including topics not only around music, but topics such as loneliness versus aloneness, Japanese culture, Buddhism and Stoicism, philosophy and literature, and so on. And now I'm doing this reading series. Further, while some of these talks were presented in English, I also decided to record some of the talks in Japanese, targeting primarily a Japanese audience, the first of which focused on why I had come to Japan in the first place, and about what I love about Japan, as well as things I definitely did not love about Japan, such as the senpai kohai issue, which I talked about in the last video, the last sections, talking about the bassist and the producer and all that stuff. 2021 was, I say, if nothing else from me, yet another year of change and transformation, quite as I spontaneously and improvisationally sang on the title track of the first of the series from Tetralogy, the song Hope, and the album Hope. I throat's suddenly a bit dry. This year you see, it's a year of change. It's a year of making things turn toward the light. Those lyrics come from Hope. Did things eventually turn toward the light? Well, for me, in a sense, yes. For the world, well, perhaps not. And then I said, in parentheses here, in terms of COVID, the answer would have to be that yes, they did. But today we have even more serious issues to concern ourselves with, unfortunately. And also, as I revise this text right now on May 28th, this is May 28th, 2023, last year, the news is saying that COVID has been making a comeback in China lately and that the WHO is preparing for another possible pandemic. I hope it's just hyperbole, a way to get people to watch news more rather than a serious concern we all need to be having now. And actually, that's over a year ago. Lately, there have been things about flesh-eating bacteria in Japan, so it really wasn't such a major thing. I could spend a lot more time on tetralogy here, but I've spoken about it at length in my talk series many times before, particularly in the series from 2021, so I will move forward, focusing my energy now on 2022 up until till the present, meaning 2023 when I wrote the essay. And then I have links to my talk on COVID and music and etc. So that's the end then of section or chapter 10. And I'm going to pause for a moment and then I'm going to read chapter 11, The Way Out is In. So next chapter, chapter 11, The Way Out is In, the title of an album. And I start this by saying, how we live our lives depends on our perspective of things. How we make art is dependent on what is inside of us and what we allow to move through us. If we create a wall to block out the light, it will remain dark. And if we remove the wall, we will be exposed perhaps at times to excessive light, which could burn or even blind us. Balance, the interplay between light and dark. The ancient Chinese referred to this as yin and yang. Since going solo in around late 2016 or early 2017, whenever asked what my theme is in terms of my music, sound and vision, so to speak, I've always answered yin and yang, or light and dark, lightness, darkness. In Japanese, these words yin and yang are pronounced in and yo, and I write the characters on the text. Everything is an interplay of two equal and opposite forces, is it not? Happiness and sadness, male and female, pleasure and pain, life and death, etc. How then to find the light? Where to look for it? The answer is inside. And by the way, that was the title of the third part of the Tetralogy. I didn't mention this. This first is Hope. Second is The Sun is Coming, which had some acoustic material on it as well as electronic stuff. The answer is inside was the third, and that title track is actually an acoustic improv with a vocal improv. And then the last was Moment. And so, moving on, my first LP of 2022 was entitled The Way Out is In, which is also the title of this chapter. This phrase was often used by the Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk, or Buddhist Zen monk, Thich Nhat Hanh. I had read many of his books translated into English in my late teens. I had not realized at the time that this phrase was one he had used. I was in the midst of recording the LP, and that phrase came out. It is possible that I subconsciously realized this, or perhaps that I had remembered it also subconsciously from a talk by the Indian teacher or guru, Sadhguru, who also frequently uses the phrase, and who I've been listening to his talks a lot at the time. In any case, it wasn't until after I did the recording, which was fully an improvisation, the song, The Way Out is In, and the phrase slipped out, that I realized it was commonly used both by Thich Nhat Hanh and by Sadhguru. Something very strange occurred during the recording of the second of two long improvisatory pieces. The second was not planned at all as an improvisation, in the first place, and it ended up as one of only 5 tracks on the LP. It also became the second longest track on the LP at 15 minutes after an only slightly longer electronic soundscape I had entitled Omicron, like the variant of COVID that was going around at the time. Let me start though with a recording of this first piece, which eventually became the title track of the album, The Way Out Is In. This track was recorded one night when I was drinking a beer, or maybe more than one beer, probably, at my apartment, and suddenly decided to do an improvisation without singing on my Ibanez acoustic guitar. This was before I had the Guild. I bought the Guild in the summer of 22. I had been doing more improvisatory style things toward the end of 2021. You can hear this style, I say, and it was beginning to develop on 2 tracks that ended up on the final 2 LPs of the Tetralogy. The first being The Answer Is Inside from the LP of the same title, which I mentioned before, and the second being Hope Regained, which can be found on the Moment LP. Hope Regained was an improvisatory version of Hope that wasn't actually Hope. I had done some improvisational versions of Hope where the lyrics were basically the same. Hope Regained actually goes off in another direction, but it starts with some of the Hope lyrics. The melody's different. And so, at any rate, I wanted to try at this point just playing, so to speak, the acoustic without any chords or choruses or anything else in mind, to just sit down and improvise on the guitar. I set up Logic, my computer, recording mic, and I basically just played. I riffed with no particular images in my head for about 7 or 8 minutes. And generally I liked what had emerged and had been recorded. Afterwards, I decided to try improvising some vocals atop this, or perhaps I ought to instead say alongside it. And so I again set up the microphone and I improvised all in one take without breaks, a half-spoken, half-sung vocal with the guitar playing back in my headphones, what it recorded. I ended up using both versions on the LP as bookends, with the vocal rendition coming first, opening the album, and the instrumental version closing the album. The vocal version opens with me intoning the phrase, "The only way out is in." I thought this too long for the title, so I aligned it to "The Way Out is In." Let me back up again for a moment now, then, to discuss the second longer acoustic guitar improvisation. The 15-minute long improvisation was recorded with a completely different intention from the title track. As I mentioned above, this track was not planned as an improvisation, but I had instead intended to do a recording, or a re-recording, you might say, of a much older arpeggio ballad I'd written all the way back in 2016, shortly after my Reptilian band had disattached itself from me. I could have just said the Reptilian band had disbanded, and I started learning how to do finger-plucked arpeggios on the acoustic. This was a technique the bassist for my 3-week HOM home side project with the ex-drummer from my first band had taught me in late 2016. In fact, he'd encouraged me to practice arpeggios with a song that we co-wrote entitled Forest. This was a song that in 2021 I would rearrange and re-entitle after re-recording it as What Had You Done? And that was included on the LP, The Sun Is Coming, the second of what ended up being the second of the Tetralogy. The song I had hoped to re-record for The Way Out Is In LP was a song entitled One Touch. However, it did not end up as One Touch here, but instead it turned into a sprawling improvisation with lyrics, almost a rant at times, dealing with attempting to leave the painful memories of the past behind, the hurt and the bitterness and the sadness, and to forget about one's psychological wounds. If you listen to the track, you can hear this. As with the track The Way Out Is In, the acoustic guitar section was not only completely improvised, although it starts with one touch and that kind of refrain comes back, but everything else is improvised. But it was also recorded first, the guitar only, without the vocals, and the vocals were added later as a separate layer so that they could more easily be mixed, effectorized, and so on. The opening is, in fact, I say here, one touch, but it soon morphs into something quite different, something loose and improvised and somehow perturbed, perhaps even a bit desperate at times. Toward the end of the piece, it comes back to the one touch refrain, and then a refrain from Chaos, which was another arpeggio song that I had in fact arranged for the acoustic the first time around, the same time I'd done One Touch, but it was Chaos was much darker, and that refrain also comes in at the end of the track. I was still at the time using a pick, and I stopped using one completely after purchasing my Guild acoustic later that year, some months later. But so I wrapped the pick against the strings, the Ibanez, and the neck of the guitar. I also began knocking the body with my knuckles, my fingers, and even the palm of my open-fisted hand. Thus, a new style of playing the acoustic for me had already begun to somewhat spontaneously start developing during the re-recording of these two pieces, During the recording of the vocal section, which, as I mentioned, was also completely improvised, apart from the lines that came from the song One Touch, about midway through the recording this 15-minute piece, the vocals, I recalled a quote from William Faulkner where he says that the past is never past. In other words, it's that we keep it alive inside of our minds and our hearts, or our emotions. And so immediately after this slipped out my mouth during the improv, and by association, I quickly followed it with a saying from Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk, that I suddenly recalled, as in contrast, this gentle Buddhist monk had always emphasized that that all we in fact have is the now, is the present, and that this very moment is in itself beautiful. One of his book titles, I say, the one I always used to recall, is A Present Moment, Wonderful Moment. And continuing on, he says that we can make it beautiful, make the present moment beautiful or wonderful by focusing on it and not on whatever painful or terrible things may have happened to us in the past. That we can stop playing back the film, so-called film in our heads again and again, and focus instead on the reality of this moment. This idea, of course, is not original to Thich Nhat Hanh. It's an idea often emphasized by many Buddhist teachers and teachings, as well as in other spiritual and philosophical traditions. However, Thich Nhat Hanh and his words are what came into my head at that moment while improvising the vocals for this song. After I finished the recording of what became Forget the Past, which had started as One Touch, later adding 2 additional tracks to round out the album, a piano ballad I had started working on the previous month, which was a rather slow and dark reinterpretation of a song originally by the artist IAMX, the artist Chris Corner, entitled Tiergarten, as well as Omicron, a 17-minute dark ambient instrumental, one I considered and still consider as the sequel to 2020's COVID. So COVID on Untitled album in 2020, and this was called Omicron as a kind of follow-up to COVID. After completing this, I looked up Thich Nhat Hanh on the internet to see what I might find, what he was up to, and I learned, much to my surprise, that he had very recently passed away, just days prior, literally, to when I had recorded the long improvisation that had become the track Forget the Past, with the phrase, talking about the present moment being all we have and so forth. I end saying coincidence, right? Coincidence. Right. Sorry, this continues, actually. After learning of his passing, I decided to make a video for the 15-minute-long Forget the Past song, including an introduction with the late Thich Nhat Hanh talking about just that, forgetting the past, and about doing one's best to live fully in the present, as well as a slideshow I created using some quotes and images that had inspired me on my journey toward recovery. I also created a self-shot video for The Way Out Is In. The night of the day I filmed the video, I'd used to create the latter self-shot on the iPhone during a walk through my neighborhood, same neighborhood I'm in now. And having not been feeling very well since waking up that morning, I spiked a fever. I had chills and then a sore throat, and later I received a confirmation that I was almost definitely COVID positive, since the people I'd essentially randomly hung out with at a bar in a neighboring town a couple of nights prior. This was very, very rare for me to do this thing during the pandemic, and perhaps a bit foolish too, but I was by then twice vaccinated, and the news had been reporting that the new Omicron strain was less serious than previous strains, and plus I was very much craving some sort of human interaction. The news was that others who were there that night, 2 nights prior, had been positive. And how did I feel? Was I okay? And of course I was spiking a fever at that point, getting a sore throat and stuff. And so the track Omicron, which I'd recently recorded for the LP before I got sick, itself became a sort of coincidence to my mind, just like the Thich Nhat Hanh quote in the timing of his passing. Coincidence, perhaps, yes, perhaps. After my fever broke, only 3 days later, and nothing too serious, I successfully this time recorded a new version of One Touch in my room, filming it from 2 different angles simultaneously. I used the iPhone and the iPad, and then later editing both together. This time around, I decided to use my classical nylon string acoustic guitar, which I had received at the end of 2021, as a kind of a present. Someone in the neighborhood had an extra guitar, didn't need it, and said it'd be great if you could play it, and just gave it to me. So I used the classical rather than the Ibanez or Ibanez. This would go in the follow-up LP, which I will discuss a bit in the next chapter. So that ends The Way Out Is In, chapter 11, and I will move to chapter 12, which is the final chapter I'm going to read for this. Ukraine, Infinity, in a Dark Planet, or What is the Truth of You and I? I'll continue with this in a moment. Well, and so 2022 continues. Russia invaded Ukraine 2 days before my 49th birthday, February 24th, and my birthday is February 26th. I was in my room, already planning that evening to record a lengthy ambient improvisation for keyboard and synth, my Yamaha 49, and acoustic guitar. As I was setting up my room, my instruments, and my recording equipment, I put the news on via YouTube, streaming it, and listened in terror as the invasion of Ukraine was announced and confirmed in various ways by various news sources, and this became the theme then for that evening's improvisation, which finally I decided to entitle after recording it, Nobody Wins, Pray for Ukraine. Later I shortened it simply to Pray for Ukraine. It is a 30-minute, rather nightmarish soundtrack to a war that had just begun, and which continues to this very day. And again, like with the thing with the apartment, it's still continuing to this day in 2024. Affecting all of us everywhere in the world, to put things mildly. I also did a video for it, which one of my acquaintances at that time afterwards said to me quite bluntly, it rubbed me the wrong way. Apparently because I myself appear in the video alongside images of the victims. I'm playing the keyboard. It was what I was filming in my room as I recorded the improv. Rather than due to the raw violence and terrifying imagery that was included in the video. he objected to the fact that I was in the video. I hired some professional writers I found online to do some short reviews for me in English, and then there was one in French, both of the track and for the video as well, as I wanted to try promoting it online. And all the reviewers basically commented on the fact that it was an uncomfortable listen, and in the case of the one video review, that it was also a difficult viewing experience with the footage of the war in Ukraine. At any rate, the composition, Pray for Ukraine, is to me a rather important chapter in my so-called book of compositions. However short or minor a chapter it may seem, this year, 2023, as I was writing this last year, in fact, I revisited this 30-minute long composition in various ways. Some were obvious, some less so. I will come back to this later in the essay. In 2022, I followed The Way Out Is In and the Ukraine EP, which is a 30-minute long track, with 2 LPs. In brief, these were number 1, the first follow-up to Way Out Is In. The second album, 2022, full-length album, was called Infinity for Beginners. And it featured the new classical guitar recording of One Touch, or re-recording some things I'd recorded in the rehearsal studio, not at home, including a raw improvised drum solo and a new heavily strummed all acoustic version of Want, with vocals later recorded and then sort of layered or effectorized at home in Logic. And then the next album after that one was called Dark Planet. This album, the latter, dealing yet again with my mental, psychological, and spiritual, you could say, recovery from the breakup and move of the early summer 2020. It was June, I guess, and then July when I came here. Even after The Way Out Is In, the memories of the past were still poking me, I say over and over, reminding me that I was still under a dark spell that had been cast some years prior. I hadn't yet made a complete recovery. I had not yet made peace with myself. I had not yet escaped the demons I was fighting internally, the battle I had waged with myself. And so I decided that this LP, Dark Planet, would be my so-called definitive final statement on the subject. I'm going to interject here, this was written last year, and say that it wasn't, because earlier this year, I did Angels of Time, which in some ways did address the breakup again, and that has been the final, and I think finally will be the final statement, because I'm through with it. But it came up again a bit on Angels of Time, but that's another story. I badly wanted to distance myself from the past, right? Forget the past. But the emotions were still partially alive within me. They refused to be ignored, and so I felt I had no choice but to release or relinquish or exercise maybe them via song and sound. This, in any case, was my intention, and my decision to myself at the time was the deal I had made with myself, and thus the album Dark Planet came into being. Music as therapy, music as transformation, music as exorcistic ritual, out with the old, in with the new, because music is my mistress, or in with good luck, out with the demons, as Japanese mothers chant with their kids during the Setsubun holiday, because music is my bride, whilst throwing handfuls of dried beans at dad, who wears a demon mask and endures the hard pellets for the love of his family. Well, I love her more than life, for at least a minute or two before unmasking himself and joining them at the dining table for a nice meal Mom has worked hard to prepare or purchased at the supermarket for them all. She touches me so deep inside. And those are lyrics from Music is My Mistress from several years earlier. My approach to this LP, the Dark Planet LP, was, rather than writing sappy or depressing or angry songs about relationships and whatnot, instead to fill the collection, the album, not only with my own originals, some of which were in fact alternative mixes or versions of things from albums I had done in the past, or the recent past, in other words, 2021, reframed and recontextualized for the then present moment and concept of the then new album, but also with my versions of songs by other artists. So in this case, the first was a song originally recorded by Jeff Buckley called You and I. The version that was included on My Sweetheart the Drunk, which is an album that was posthumously released after he died. I believe his mother actually published it, or got it put out. There's another version of You and I, which is actually a different song, basically included on other compilations, and I say it's more melodic and played on the guitar and has different completely lyrics. The version on My Sweetheart the Drunk, I continue saying here, the Sweetheart demo version was rather minimal and there's no guitar on it. Buckley's voice soars over a dark drone. He had never had the chance to properly, complete or release it during his brief time on this earth, but it was included nonetheless on the 2 times double-length LP of demos for his planned second LP, one his mother had posthumously overseen the release of approximately 1 year after her son Jeff Buckley, tragically died in a drowning accident on May 29th, 2017. So you see, I jump ahead of myself and I give all these comments like I'm commenting on my own essay because I had written this so long ago, and then I'm saying the same things in the essay. So I'm getting ahead of myself. It's the Nathan Adler thing. I mentioned in parentheses this posthumous release, My Sweetheart the Drunk, had its 25th anniversary very recently. At the time of this writing, it had been the 25th anniversary, and I did an EP to mark that. The cover version I included on the Dark Planet LP had actually been recorded by me the year prior, and I had originally considered including it on the second part, or the second LP of my Tetralogy for 2021, The Sun is Coming, but ultimately I had decided to leave it off due to potential copyright issues as a cover song, and because also I ultimately wanted to have another new original song on the LP rather than a cover, and that ended up being the song Inner States of Mind, which is on The Sun is Coming as an original. The other covers I included on the Dark Planet LP alongside my own originals and remixes of my own originals were both pieces that had been written and performed by the artist IMX, a moniker used by singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist Christopher or Chris Corner, also electronic musician, whose music I discovered in 2021 and had quickly grown fond of. My piano arrangement of Wildest Wind, his original version appears as the final track of the excellent Metanoia LP by IMX, can also be found on the third part of my Tetralogy, Answers Inside, and as mentioned earlier, my version of Tears Cried, arranged as a dark piano ballad, appeared on The Way Out of the Zin, the first album of 2022. And speaking of Wildest Wind, I also did a version of it this year and put it on my new This Dark Shroud album, but that's another story. In the case of the first song that I covered for Dark Planet was North Star, one of my favorite electronic style IMX songs. I didn't change the lyrics very much at all, though I did tweak them in some subtle ways. However, I did completely redo the arranging it for acoustic guitar, using mainly arpeggios. The original IMX version, of which there are a number of different mixes, is a cool, rather beat-heavy electro industrial style dance track, but my version is quiet. I guess I'd call it industrial dance. My version is quiet with understated, mostly soft softly intoned vocals. North Star, I want you to guide me home, I write. And in the first mix I included on the LP, I added some electronic ambience or quiet noise in the background, and during the bridge, I also added some minimal electronic beats, while on the second version included, which comes at the end of the album, it's presented as is with nothing added to the raw guitar and vocals. Both audio files were actually taken from the so-called soundtrack to a video that a frequent collaborator at that time, a photographer and videographer by profession, who lived in the neighborhood, had shot of me performing the song after having just arranged it for guitar. So the guitar and vocals were not recorded with proper separation in Logic, making it a bit more difficult to mix properly. However, I like the live, spontaneous feel of the recording and decided to use the audio for both mixes, despite whatever flaws might be inherent in the original sound file. And actually, the version with the backing in it sounds really quite good, I think. The second version, it's raw. And so again, it doesn't have separation, so it just sounds like, raw recording, but I did the best I could with the mix. I go through this whole long thing about the lyrics to the second IMX cover that I covered, that I put on the album, which is Mercy, and I'll just summarize this because what I wanted to say is that I felt uncomfortable with the lyrics. It's a kind of master-slave type thing where the so-called protagonist of the song is, enchanted by her and feels inferior to her and wants her to kind of dominate in a sexual way. And I ended up changing the lyric. I like the song a lot, and he actually does an electronic version and an acoustic version, kind of like I'm doing with North Star. I did it acoustically. I'll talk about this, but I changed the lyrics because I didn't want to sing them as they were. So I go on to say that the second IMX cover is Mercy, and I call it a somewhat lyrically sleazy ballad. By re-recorded, I mean that I had previously done a live take version on my Ibanez acoustic, which I performed outdoors, seated on a bench, on a sunny and somewhat windy day, filmed with my iPhone on its portable stand, and put the tweaked audio version of it on another LP entitled Live Acoustic, which was published as well in 2022. The version for the Dark Planet LP, however, was recorded properly, so-called via Logic, in my room with guitar and voice done separately. Though my voice had been at that time rather hoarse, this hoarseness had stubbornly lasted for several weeks, as I recalled. I could not figure out why it was hoarse, as I hadn't abused my voice or my throat in the least, nor had I been battling a cold, nor was it COVID or any such thing. And ironically, it's like these weird cycles. My voice, it's not totally hoarse, but it's a bit hoarse tonight, and I'm performing tomorrow acoustically for the first time in a while. So weird how history does seem to repeat itself and move in loops, at least in my life. So I had a bit of a hoarse voice. In any case, my way of singing the song the second time around was a bit different from the previously recorded so-called live version that I played sitting on a bench and just recorded with my iPhone. At that time, my voice had been a bit stronger and clearer. Perhaps the slight huskiness fit the song's theme. My head voice, appropriately, I put in quotes, I'll do the quote thing, cracked and broken. Corner had released 2 versions of Mercy over the years on official IMX LPs. One was an electronic version with beats, which was the original version he'd done on an early LP, and another version some years later on an acoustic-centric LP, which was, of course, performed acoustically, but it was still rather rhythmical in nature. My arrangement took its cue from the latter version, and at the time I preferred to do an acoustic arrangement over a purely electronic one, kind of like with North Star, which I later did electronically for This Dark Shroud. Though I say the latter would have been easy enough for me to do in Logic with synth and drum loops or programming or sampling. This, however, was not what I wanted for this track. Rather, I needed Mercy to be raw and emotional. And so I started by first adapting the chords on the guitar, arranging. I made my recording of the song even more intensely rhythmical than the acoustic IMX versions I'd heard had been. And I did this not only by tapping on the body of the guitar, as Corner initially does in his live version to create a rhythmical loop. He taps it and then he loops it with the looper. But also I made it rhythmical by striking the neck and frets, or between the frets, to create shimmering harmonics. A style I've begun developing and experimenting with a lot around this time, and which has by now become my default style of playing acoustic. In other words, that is rhythmically, whilst utilizing harmonics, neck and body tapping, and all without using a pick. And I wrote this in 2023, and to this day, if you listen to my acoustic stuff, I've continued sort of developing this style, rather rhythmical guitar playing style. In any case, I say, where my two versions of Mercy, two meaning the outdoor live version and the home studio version I recorded for Dark Planet, where they diverge most radically from Corner's versions, as I mentioned earlier, more than in the arrangement alone, was that the rewrite I did of his S&M style confessional lyrics, so-called. There was just no way, I say, I was going to be able to sing them as is with any sort of true to myself emotion, or without feeling extremely awkward and unnatural about it for that matter. I simply could not relate to the words Corner sang in the original as much as I loved the song itself. In the IMX version, Corner sings about how a or his woman or girlfriend or mistress is his plaything. He calls her a toy box, and he is a slave to her so-called sexy wonderfulness, and he relates in the lyrics how she is his lifeline and he is a mere idiot to her so-called poetry, and etc. In my less romanticized rendition or interpretation, there's a lot more hurt and anger and sadness and betrayal behind the wall of obsession and sexual enslavement that is at the center of the original's confessional lyrics. And although I say I definitely did not feel right singing Corner's lyrics, was performing the song, even if only once or twice, for the recordings, and though I'd felt a strong urge or need to change them to fit the theme or themes of my own work at the time, upon listening again to the rather bitter words I had myself rewritten from my own version, a mutilation of the original dripping with sex and lust, I say, master-slave lyrics, the way I described, I admittedly did not feel so wonderful about my own lyrical mutation of his lyrics either. Perhaps this is why I've never been able to successfully perform the song live. Well, enough said about the song and about the IMX covers on the Dark Planet LP. Moving on, the Dark Planet LP also included a number of longer originals, though all were variations of things I had released in other forms previously. Two were remixes of tracks from the second album of the Tetralogy, including Inner States of Mind, which it was called Inner States of Blind on this album. Another was an older electronic instrumental with spoken word piece, otherwise instrumental. I remixed from the original Logic file, which at the time I had recently sort of rediscovered or stumbled upon again, and I liked it, and entitled it Temporal States of Being. I also created a rather surreal video for this, and the track was accepted for as an aside for a Coil, the band or Project Coil tribute anthology, on which the track was also included. The last of these so-called remixes or rearranged tracks was a mostly instrumental version of what had originally been my cover of the IMX Tear Garden, re-entitled Tears Cried, and this in a rather stripped-down lyricless form. The only part that has lyrics is the chorus, just Tears Cried comes in, like once per chorus. Everything else that's no lyrics. And since I'd rearranged Tear Garden, it's basically became my original song because it's just my piano part and rain sounds and the Tears Cried chorus. For the video, I created for this song, Tears Cried, I decided to use open source footage of rainstorms in color juxtaposed with some of the newsreel footage I had used for my Ukraine project or video earlier in the year. The Ukraine shots I used for the Tears Cried video were all converted to stark black and white, and they showed people crying at funerals for their friends or family and so forth. So it's Tears Cried, and so it kind of thematically, at least with the video, was connected to that. Indeed, I say the word dragging on, people suffering, people dying, people starving, and me not wanting the album to be merely about my own personal wounds, those petty, little, rather selfishly insignificant wounds, realizing finally at this time, perhaps at the deepest level of my being, that the wounds of the world were and would always be far larger and more vast than any personal problems or worries or emotional things I would ever experience could ever hold or bear. Indeed. This is again what I wrote last year in 2023. Thinking about this now, and in hindsight, perhaps it was during that time then at which such realizations began to fully dawn on me, to hammer even harder at my consciousness than previously. I cannot say when or whether there was any single instant at which this significant realization dawned or hit me, at least not one that I can now pinpoint, nothing like the so-called dramatic, enlightenment of the legendary Bodhidharma. I'd written a song about him. The first patriarch of Chan, or Zen Buddhism in China, is said to have had after 9 long years of staring at a wall. Or like when the diligent brahmacharya, the mendicant of India or Hinduism, who has meditated daily for years beside the great Ganges River, intuits in a sudden flash of realization that the entire universe exists in each of the single grains of sand beneath him. Om Namah Shivaya. Okay. Yes, perhaps this was when the point at which my work and my way of thinking about all the problems of the world finally began paving the way for my real realization, better late than never, which is that the suffering I was causing myself over a failed relationship and an embellished, emotionally driven, and likely highly distorted backstory I created to protect myself or my ego, a story that emphasized in my own mind how badly I had been treated, how I had been lied to, how I had been deceived, whether or not intentional deception was involved, and even if it had been, to what extent I had been deceived and or lied to, I will never know, nor was it or is it relevant ultimately. And then continuing, was this really no more than all of this was really no more than a fleck of mental lint I'd given far too much attention to and had thereby prolonged my own misery. I realized, to return to the lint metaphor, that I could simply brush this lint off my shoulder or neck or whatever anytime I was ready to do so. In other words, it no longer really mattered, since it was all in the past now and did not reflect the reality of my present moment in any way. And I quote Faulkner, "The past is never past," and then I quote Thich Nhat Hanh, "Present moment, wonderful moment." And this ends, and so eventually, when I was ready, ... And that is where I will end this reading. That's 4 chapters like I did last time, and I want to end there. I will just say a few words in closing to wrap up. Firstly, I don't know that I'm going to read any more of this essay for this series. Again, I'll put include the link at Blogspot. Please read the essay if you're interested, or the full thing. And actually this essay too, I kind of want to revise it eventually because, as I said, the prior section about 2018-19 is kind of, scant. It's not, it doesn't go into much detail about the different projects. It's very brief. So I could maybe fill that section in. But in addition to that, this essay only goes up to a certain point last summer. And I've since done some other important work I would consider, like Angels of Chaos, Angels of Time, which is revisiting the Angel of Death project, and again, which became another statement on the breakup, and in fact, my final statement. I revived This Dark Thread last year, which I talk about briefly here, but then from that point, I hadn't written again. Even this year I did the Unbecoming, and then In the Age of Kali, which is the latest album, which also connects to a series of albums I did in 2022 that's actually talked about in the next section, I think. The 4 symphonies for the end of the world, and the second of which was Kali Yuga, the era of Kali, or the age of Kali. So yes, I may expand this essay and bring it more to the present, and then, I'm not yet sure, but again, I'm not sure I'm going to read any more of this essay for the series. I think it's a good place to stop, and again, it's enough sort of, if anyone's interested, right, by now, they can go to the blog and read what's there. So, the essay goes on. I'll just mention, it talks about my pre-50th birthday trilogy. Actually, last year was the year of trilogies or triptychs. So I talk about the ones that followed these albums. And like I say, maybe this year I'll write more. We'll see. In any case, thank you very much. It's good night for me. Probably it's like 12 a.m. now. Last night was 3 a.m. It's not that bad. I had to stop a couple times because the memory was full, and I fixed that problem. So I was able to get through this. And tomorrow night I'll be performing acoustically. My voice is kind of, I don't know if it's hoarse if I sing, or it just feels a little dry or something. But I think it'll be okay. Try to get some sleep. And performing tomorrow night at Borders, which I often perform there, or had until recently, so this will be the first time in a while. Thank you very much. End the essay there, at least in the reading series for now. And who knows, I may write more, and I may revise. And also I have the Broken Reptile essay, which is another perspective of what happened with the band, that is also on this blogspot, so you can check that out too. Thank you very much. Signing off, Marc Lowe in Tokyo. Thanks.